Good afternoon. Welcome to Reading Hatchet. I'm Robert Teacher. Today we are going to be reading chapter 14, pages 128 to 128 of this version, Gary Paulson's Hatchet. And as usual, we're going to read along and look at the vocabulary for chapter 14. So we're starting on page 121. So let's get started. Mistakes. Small mistakes could turn into disasters. Funny little mistakes could snowball that while you were still smiling at the humor, you could find yourself looking at death. In the city, he made a mistake. Usually there was a way to rectify it, make it all right. If he fell on his bike and sprained a leg, he could wait for it to heal. If he forgot something at the store, he could find other food in the refrigerator. It's a mistake. Shows you an action or judgment that is misguided or wrong. If you make a mistake on your test, you can just erase it. Brian makes a mistake, some he can fix, some he can't fix. Okay, so let's continue on bottom of 121. Now, it was different and all so quick. All so incredibly quick. If he sprained a leg here, he might starve before he could get around again. If he missed while he was hunting, or if the fish moved away, he might starve. If he got sick, really sick, so he couldn't move, he might starve. Mistakes. Early in the new time, he had learned the most important thing, the truly vital knowledge that drives all creatures in the forest. Food is all. Food was simply everything. All things in the woods, from insects to fish to bears, were always looking for food. It was the great single driving influence in nature. To eat. All must eat. But the way he learned it almost killed him. His second new night, stomach full of fish and the fire smoldering in the shelter, he had been sound asleep when something, he thought later, it might be smell, had awakened him. He's a smoldering. Yongi. Smoldering is when the fire is burning slowly with smoke but no flame. Looks like this, like charcoal for a barbecue. There's smoke, but there's no flame. Smoldering. Okay. So a smoldering fire, Brian is asleep, and then, page 122. Near the fire, completely unafraid of the smoking coals, completely unafraid of Brian, a skunk was digging where he had buried the eggs. There was some sliver of a moon, and in the faint pearl light, he could see the bushy tail, the white stripes down the back, and he had nearly smiled. He did not know how the skunk had found the eggs. Some smell, perhaps some tiny fragment of shell had left a smell, but it looked almost cute. Its little head down and its little tail up as it dug, kicking the sand back. So there's a skunk in his shelter. Skunku. This is a cat-sized mammal from the weasel family. It has the distinctive black and white striped fur, and when threatened, it squirts a fine spray of foul-smelling irritant liquid from its anal gland towards its attacker. So it can spray a kind of juice at you that smells really, really, really bad. Okay. It's the skunk. Okay, let's continue, page 122. Okay. Its little head down, its tail up as it dug, kicking the sand back. But those were his eggs, not the skunk's. And the half smile had been quickly replaced with fear that he would lose his food. and he had grabbed a handful of sand and thrown it at the skunk. "Get out of here." He was going to say more, some silly human words. But in less than half a second, the skunk had snapped its rear end up, curved the tail over, and sprayed Brian with a direct shot aimed at his head from less than 4 feet away. In the tiny confines of the shelter, the effect was devastating. The thick, sulfurous, rotten odor filled the small room, heavy, ugly, and stinking. The corrosive spray that hit his face seared his lungs and eyes, blinding him. He screamed and threw himself sideways, taking the entire wall off the shelter, screamed and clawed out of the shelter, and ran to the shore of the lake. Stumbling and tripping, he scrambled into the water and slammed his head back and forth, trying to wash his eyes, slashing at the water to clear his eyes. 100 funny cartoons he had seen about skunks, cute cartoons about the smell of skunks, cartoons to laugh at and joke about. But when the spray hit, there was nothing funny about it. He was completely blind for almost 2 hours, a lifetime. He thought that he might be permanently blind, or at least impaired, and that would have been the end. As it was, the pain in his eyes lasted for days, bothered him after that for 2 weeks. The smell in the shelter, in his clothes, and in his hair was still there now, almost a month and a half later, and he had nearly smiled. Mistakes. Food had to be protected. While he was in the lake, trying to clear his eyes, the skunk went ahead and dug up the rest of the turtle eggs and ate every one. Licked all the shells clean and couldn't have cared less that Brian was thrashing around in the water like a dying carp. The skunk had found food and was taking it, and Brian was paying for a lesson. Protect food and have a good shelter. Not just a shelter to keep out the wind and rain, but a shelter to protect, a shelter to make him safe. The day after the skunk, he set about making a good place to live. The basic idea had been good. The place for his shelter was right, but he just hadn't gone far enough. He'd been lazy. But now he knew the second most important thing about nature, what drives nature. Food was first, but the work for the food went on and on. Nothing in nature was lazy. He had tried to take a shortcut and paid for it with his turtle eggs, which he'd come to like more than chicken eggs from the store. They had been fuller somehow, had more depth to them. He set about improving his shelter by tearing it down. From dead pines up the hill, he brought down heavier logs and fastened several of them across the opening, wedging them at the top and burying the bottoms in the sand. Then he wove long branches in through them to make a truly tight wall, and still not satisfied, he took even thinner branches and wove them into the first weave. When he was at last finished, he could not find a place to put his fist through. It all held together like a very stiff, woven basket. So we heard wove, woven, weave. These are all from the word weave, jada. Form by interlacing long threads, passing in one direction with others at a right angle in another direction. So weave specifically, we have two things coming together at 90-degree angle and over, under, at a 90-degree cross like this. Okay, so weave, wove, woven. Continuing page 125. He judged the door opening to be the weakest spot, and here he took special time to weave a door of willows in so tight a mesh that no matter how a skunk tried, or a porcupine, he thought, looking at the marks in his leg, it could not possibly get through. He had no hinges, but by arranging some cut off limbs at the top in the right way, he had a method to hook the door in place. And when he was in and the door was hung, he felt relatively safe. A bear, something big, could still get in by tearing at it, but nothing small could bother him, and the weave of the structure still allowed the smoke to filter up through the top and out. All in all, it took him 3 days to make the shelter, stopping to shoot fish and eat as he went, bathing 4 times a day to try and get the smell from the skunk to leave. When his house was done, finally done right, he turned to the constant problem: food. It was all right to hunt and eat, or fish and eat, but what happened if he had to go a long time without food? What happened when the berries were gone and he got sick or hurt, or, thinking of the skunk, laid up temporarily? He needed a way to store food, a place to store it. He needed food to store. Mistakes. He tried to learn from the mistakes. He couldn't bury food again, couldn't leave it in the shelter, because something like a bear could get at it right away. It had to be high, somehow high and safe. Above the door to the shelter, up the rock face about 10 feet, was a small ledge that he could make a natural storage place, unreachable to animals, except that it was unreachable to him. A ladder, of course. He needed a ladder, but he had no way to fashion one, nothing to hold the steps on, and that stopped him until he found a dead pine with many small branches still sticking out. Using his hatchet, he chopped the branches off so they stuck out 4 or 5 inches all up along the log. Then he cut the log off about 10 feet long and dragged it down to his shelter. It was a little heavy, but dry, and he could manage it. And when he propped it up, he found he could climb to the ledge with ease, though the tree did roll from side to side a bit as he climbed. His food shelf, as he thought of it, had been covered with bird manure, and he carefully scraped it away with sticks. Okay? So he makes a ladder out of a pine tree like this one. Okay, so ladder, a structure consisting of a series of bars between 2 upright lengths of wood, metal, or rope used for climbing up or down. So he makes this ladder out of pine tree to get to the shelf. Okay, so we're continuing 126. He had never seen birds there, but that was probably because the smoke from his fire went up right across the opening, and they didn't like smoke. Still, he had learned, and he took time to weave a snug door for the small opening with green willows, cutting it so it jammed in tightly. And when finished, he stood back and looked at the rock face, his shelter below, the food shelf above, and allowed a small bit of pride to come. Not bad, he thought, not bad for somebody who used to have trouble greasing the bearings on his bicycle. Not bad at all. Mistakes. He had made a good shelter and food shelf, but he had no food except for fish and the last of the berries. And the fish, as good as they still tasted then, were not something he could store. His mother had left some salmon out by mistake one time when they went on an overnight trip to Cape Hesper to visit relatives, and when they got back, the smell filled the whole house. There was no way to store fish. At least, he thought, no way to store them dead. But as he looked at the weave of his structure, a thought came to him, and he moved down to the water. He began putting the waste from the fish back into the water, and the food had attracted hundreds of new ones. I wonder, They seemed to come easily to the food, at least the small ones. He had no trouble now shooting them, and had even speared one with his old fish spear now that he knew to aim low. He could dangle something in his fingers, and they came up right away. It might be possible, he thought, might just be possible to trap them, make some kind of pond. To his right, at the base of the cliff, there were piles of smaller rocks that had fallen from the main chunk, splinters and hunks, from double fist size to some as large as his head. He spent an afternoon carrying rocks to the beach, in what amounted to making a large pen for holding live fish, 2 rock arms that stuck out 15 feet into the lake and curved together at the end. Where the arms came together, he left an opening about 2 feet across. Then he sat on the shore and waited. When he had first started dropping the rocks, all the fish had darted away. But his fish-trapped pile of bones, skin, and guts was in the pond area, and the prospect of food brought them back. Soon, under an hour, there were 30 or 40 small fish in this enclosure, and Brian made a gate by weaving small willows together into a fine mesh and closed them in. Okay, so he has made an animal pen. He called it a pen. Okay, a set of walls for keeping animal or livestock from leaving. So his is a fish pen, but animal pen is a wall or a barrier or a structure or a set of walls to keep the animals from leaving. So he has made an animal pen for fish. Okay, continuing on 128. Fresh fish, he had yelled. I have fresh fish for sale. Storing live fish to eat later had been a major breakthrough, he thought. It wasn't just keeping from starving. It was trying to save ahead, think ahead. Of course, he didn't know how sick he would get of food. He's trying to prevent starving. He's starving or suffering or dying from hunger. He doesn't want to starve, so now he is thinking ahead. Okay, so that's it for 121 to 128. Let's recap our vocabulary really quick. First, we have mistakes. Mistake, an action or judgment that is misguided or wrong. Brian's been making many mistakes, but he's learning from them. Smoldering, burning slowly with smoke but no flame. So smoldering, this is like charcoal or barbecue. You have smoldering. There's flame, there's heat, there's smoke, but there's no fire, there's no actual flame. Okay, smoldering. Skunk, cat-sized American mammal from the weasel family, with distinctive black and white fur striped. When threatened, it squirts a fine spray of foul-smelling, bad-smelling, irritant liquid from its anal gland towards its attacker. These are skunks. Okay, in the US, there are lots of skunks. Weave, jada. Okay, this form interlacing threads in a pattern like this, over, under, passing in one direction with the others at a right angle to them. So this is a simple weave. Brian weaved big logs, willow branches, and then small things to make a wall like this. He made a weave wall. Ladder, celery, structure consisting of a series of bars, 2-step. Okay, used for climbing up or down. Brian made a ladder out of a tree like this one, a pine tree ladder. And animal pen, a set of walls for keeping animals or livestock from leaving. So this is a pig pen for keeping the pig inside. You can say pig pen, cow pen, fish pen, sheep pen, or just animal pen for any kind. Okay, so let's look at in starving. Suffering or dying from hunger. This means you're so hungry that it's hurting your body. Not just, oh, I'm hungry, I can eat lunch. So hungry that you are suffering. You have pain, or you are dying from the hunger. Okay, so let's look at the recap for chapter 14. Brian is reflecting on the mistakes he's made learning to survive in the wild. He has learned from many, many mistakes. The first mistake is a skunk comes into Brian's hut and finds his collection of turtle eggs and wants to eat it. Brian has learned the mistake that everything is hungry and everything in the wild is about food. Food matters the most. And when Brian tries to throw sand at the skunk sprays him and then eats all the eggs he had collected. So this skunk spray is like a corrosive, acidy substance. If it gets in your face or your eyes, it will burn. But it also smells really, 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 really bad. If this happens to you, you will smell bad, your eyes will burn, your ears will burn, your nose will burn. And Brian got this from 4 feet away, straight into the face. And for 2 hours he can't see, and he's trying to wash his face. And for 2 hours he sees nothing. And for 2 more weeks, his eyes still burn. So this is very bad if it happens to you, okay? But skunk can do it. So skunks are kind of dangerous animal in the US and Canada. If this happens, it's really, really bad. Okay, and then on top of it, it eats all of his turtle eggs. It eats all of them. So he gets attacked, he can't see for 2 hours, 2 weeks of eye pain, and all of his turtle eggs eaten because his house had no door. Brian creates a food shelf to store his food away from animals. This is like a common Minecraft strategy. You make a shelf and you store your food there where there's no creeper, no animal. Brian does the same thing. He makes a cliffside storage so that he can go up the ladder to get his food, but animals can't go up the ladder to get his food. Okay. He thinks about it. Brian also creates a fish pen to trap fish, also using the weave. This is in case of emergency needs. If he gets hurt or sick, he needs to have easy food. If he's injured, he can't go hunting for chickens or finding turtle eggs. He needs to have easy food, so he makes a fish trap. He makes 2 walls and then a door, and he uses old food scraps to trap many fish for eating later on. Okay? So from his mistakes, Brian has learned to make a stronger house. From his mistakes, Brian has learned to have a food shelf. And from his mistakes, Brian has learned to make a fish pen to have emergency food for the future. So new Brian is learning to live in the wilderness. That's everything. See you next time. Bye.